So this 110,000 capacity church being built in Nigeria has done something amazing, which is to expose the level of slave and colonial mentality that is still holding Africans back. Think about it. When a mega church is built in Europe, it is celebrated as a wonderful piece of history and a monument to be appreciated. But when the same thing is done in Africa, suddenly we remember that a majority of the population is living in poverty, and that money could have been, in quotes, being used to feed the poor or to start businesses. And the fact that many Africans are the ones saying these things online just tells you how this mentality, this colonial backward mentality, actually stops us from seeing the hypocrisy. I mean, just a couple of years ago, over $1 billion was raised not to build but to repair the Notre Dame church. And how was it received? It was celebrated, appreciated as a piece of history that was built several hundred years ago. But when Africans try to build their own piece of history that will be celebrated hundreds of years from now, then suddenly the mentality, the backwardness kicks in, and then we start fighting these things. And to those who say that this money would have been better used building factories or creating jobs, the simple question you should ask yourself is, how many jobs have you created? Because this is another witchcraft mindset that Africans have, which I believe is still stemming back from the slavery and colonial mentality to always think in terms of zero sum. So we assume because one part is expanding, it's always at the expense of the other. So if the church is growing and expanding, it means that it's coming at the cost of factories and businesses and job creation. But one thing we fail to realize, which is still the hypocrisy we're unable to realize, is the number of tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of jobs that are created in 5 to 10 years that it takes to build these churches. To be clear, I'm not exactly saying this because I particularly endorse any of these churches. That is irrelevant to the point. The point is, why can't we see our own hypocrisy that when something is done abroad, it is nice, it's amazing, but suddenly when it's done here, we remember that we have problems, as though there are not people dying of starvation in Europe or homeless people in Europe, or all that money that is being used in other things there too could have been used to help those poor people. I mean, even if there are scammers, and that is still irrelevant to the point, because at least, they are investing the money you say they scammed back in the country, and it's creating jobs. You haven't created a single job. Because we're believers, it doesn't mean that we are stupid. Because one thing we do learn from the wisdom that Jesus shared about the shrewd servant is that a bad means that leads to a good end is better than a good means that leads to a bad end. Because you may say they are scammers, you may say they are robbing the population. What I see, and the one thing that a positive mindset should see, is the appreciation that at least it's being invested back in the country where it's creating jobs for the locals that you say have been scammed. Compared to your politicians who embezzle all this money and then spend it or invest it in Europe, where eventually all those assets are frozen and the local people who are stolen from never benefit anything. I mean, so many people watching this right now will go online and rant these things because you're now in the new middle class, you're making some money thanks to the internet, and so you feel that you're enlightened, and so you don't need religion anymore. There is a good chance that the apartment you're renting was probably built by a scammer locally, and you're only able to enjoy that because even though he scammed the people abroad, he invested it back in your country and built a building that right now you're enjoying. Am I saying that every real estate project was built by a scammer? Of course not. The same way I'm saying not every church or pastor that builds a mega church is a scammer or is doing that at the expense of the people. But all of that is still irrelevant to the point. The point here is we should bring ourselves to the point where we can emancipate our minds from this slave mentality that leads us to self-destructive hypocrisy. If you see something wonderful being done around you, appreciate it, celebrate it, especially if you're going to benefit from it directly or indirectly. Stop following the bandwagon of people who are unemployed and are relying on trends and traffic to actually make money on the internet because they're broke and unemployed, to say rubbish about your own people, your own nation, and the things that will benefit you and your children in years to come. So I'm going to end this video by leaving you with a quote from a very inspiring Senegalese entrepreneur entrepreneur who says a very powerful principle her dad taught her is that you criticize by creating. You criticize through creating. So if you're worried that churches are not creating jobs enough, go out there and create jobs. That is your own way of criticizing the church. If you think that something isn't right in the government, criticize by creating. Don't sit in your single room and because you have an Android phone and you can write things online, and so you just go about ranting, and at the end of the day you don't add any meaningful contribution to society. So my friend, whatever you do, be proud of your country, especially for anything that puts it on the map. Even if you don't necessarily support or agree what puts it on the map, as long as it's something positive. You don't have to be a fan of football to be proud if your country wins the World Cup. It has put your country on the map. It has given you exposure. It's something positive. Celebrate it. Now, all the other background things, the people in the West have learned to bury those negative things and project the positive things only. Perhaps it's time that we Africans also learn to do that. That way we can keep supporting our own progress instead of actively destroying ourselves. So if this video blessed you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that bell if you're new to the channel. I'm Bodas Jumesi from Wisdom for Dominion. Thank you so much for watching, and until the next one, stay blessed.